Well, welcome to Chapter 1, Criminal Justice Today. This lecture is going to be following the chapter in your text, but it's also going to be adding a little bit of material I think might be important or useful. That material generally won't be displayed on the screen, but it will be in audio format. So, when I start teaching Intro to Criminal Justice, I like to ask a couple quick questions. The first question I like to ask is, what do we know about criminal justice? And there's two kind of sub-questions of that I think are important. And those questions are, what do we know that is true? And what do we know that is false? Because we operate on what we know, but some of what we know isn't true. And when we operate and make decisions on things that aren't true, we make mistakes. We can hurt people, we can hurt societies, we can hurt ourselves. Um, it leads to generally poor decisions. So one of the things that I find most interesting as an educator is when I discover mistakes that I make, when I discover falsehoods that I believe to be true. One of the most vital things about education is learning, relearning, rediscovering the truth. And that's a lot of what criminal justice is about. So, for example, the general public, and I dare say most of you watching this PowerPoint, um, have certain beliefs about all sorts of things. And some of those beliefs are dramatically incorrect. My favorite example is people who fear crime. The group of people statistically in the United States that show the greatest fear of crime are older white females. And the group of people that show the lowest fear of crime um, are urban black males. And ironically, the group of people that is least likely to be a victim of crime, certainly between those two groups, is your rural white females, particularly elderly or old. And the group which is most likely to be a victim of crime is urban black males. So they're each operating on the wrong beliefs and they're making decisions, I think, that are pretty poor. So a lot of what we're going to be doing in here and for this chapter is we're going to be talking about things that we think are true. We're going to be addressing those and maybe changing your mind, or maybe you'll be changing mind in some of your posts. So as we go through this, the learning objectives I'm not going to cover. They're really things for you to look at. There are certainly important points, but they kind of summarize the chapter along with it. Now, the first question is, what is crime? Well, crime has different definitions in different societies, but it is, in American society, something that is a violation of the criminal law. Broadly speaking, law is divided into two large categories. The civil law, which is things like divorce or contracts, torts, and the criminal law, which is what we're concerned with here. And the criminal law is the violation of which is punishable by criminal sanctions. And the sanctions we have are fines, which are very common, incarceration, and at the extreme, the death penalty. And then there are degrees inside each one of those. Now, it's not always easy to determine exactly what is and is not criminal behavior because some things that are objectively bad are not deemed to be crimes. So if you lie, if you cheat, if you cheated on a spouse, or if you lied to your employer or your employees, generally those are not crimes, though they can be bad behavior. And not all bad things that you do that are crimes are necessarily bad behavior either. There's a flip side of that. So if you were to be motivated with very good reason to do something and you went ahead and do it, it could still be a crime. And the example there would be if someone was suffering needlessly and you put them out of their misery with no hope of compensation or benefit, it would still be a homicide. So one of the things that we have is a realization, and I want to introduce a term here, ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the idea that um, your culture, your beliefs is what is right, and it's what we're most familiar with. So we're all ethnocentric to some extent. We all believe, okay, our society, the way we live, is the right way to live, because after all, that's how we're living. But different countries have different ideas about crime. In some countries, certain things are crimes and that are not crimes in the United States, and vice versa. And this even is true in the United States. So, for example, in the state of North Carolina, prostitution, or more properly under the code, prostitution and assignation, is a criminal act. But in certain counties in Nevada, prostitution and assignation is not a crime. So we're going to have to distinguish that. I also going to introduce one more term, chronocentrism, which is the idea that the time that you're living in is what's right. We're very much creatures of our time, the years we're living right now. So if you went back and you asked your great-grandfather what is good or bad, what is criminal or non-criminal, he's going to have a different definition than what you have today. And if you could go forward and ask your great-granddaughter that same question, she might have a very different idea. A quick example would be if you went back 150 or 200 years and asked someone here in Raleigh, North Carolina, is slavery wrong? You would probably get the answer no, and it's certainly not a crime. And of course, if you went forward 100 years or 150 years, I don't know what is acceptable behavior today that'll be a crime then, or vice versa. Now, there are two common models that we talk about how what is a crime is decided by society. Those two models here are the consensus model and the conflict model. The consensus model says it's what I call somewhat jokingly the kumbaya model. It's the idea that society, particularly one as diverse as America with different ethnic and religious and racial groups, have still a shared moral system, and that together with this sort of shared system, those that violate the common beliefs, and it's not universal beliefs because there's going to be people that do not believe what they're doing is wrong, and we're going to still define it as a crime. When an individual violates these common beliefs held by most of society, they're deemed to be harmful and they're deemed to be crimes. It's a rather optimistic point of view. The conflict model, which owes at least something to Marxist thought, believe it or not, says, well, moral attitudes are not a constant. And the criminal law is defined by those in power. And this is where we kind of get into a Marxist analysis of class. Those that hold political power define what is right and wrong. So, for example, if we were to talk about Social Security, since millionaires don't pay taxes on Social Security, they don't find that a crime. Social Security withholding stops after about $100,000. Beyond that, there's no 8% withholding. But you, as a member of the working class, like I am, we pay Social Security on every dime we earn. The wealthy, because they control the society, have decided that that's not a crime, that they don't pay it. But if we had power, we might impose that. So the groups in power impose their values on the rest of society. And that's where, and I don't want to go too far down this road, that's where you get the idea that the elite in society, in America primarily the financial elite, control and make the decisions about what's legal and what's illegal. Now, using these two models, we can create definitions of crime. So one definition of crime would be punishable under criminal law as defined by a majority or the powerful minority, and that would, answer both ends of the extreme. By the way, these are just two models. There's obviously other models that we can discuss, and anytime we talk about a model in here, I think it's important to point out that it is just a model. It's not reality. The second part of this is it should be considered an offense against society as a whole, and it would be prosecuted by public officials. If the public isn't interested in prosecuting it, it may be a civil offense. It is punished by, again, the three options I talked about earlier: a fine, which is probably the most common thing you can get, a loss of liberty, or in the extreme, life. We can kill you, capital punishment. I do want to point out, and your book points out here, that there is a difference between crime and deviance. Crime is a violation of the criminal law, but it is not always something that only a small group of people do. Deviance is behavior that is considered against the norm of society. It is not necessarily a criminal act. So, for example, you can have something that's rude. If you pick your nose in public, that's deviant behavior, but it's not a criminal act. And you can have things that we all do. So many people, I dare say almost everyone listening to this, speeds a little bit. They go a little bit over the speed limit in the United States. That means it's not deviant behavior. Deviant behavior, in fact, is someone who absolutely obeys the speed limit. It's still against the law, even though most people do it. So just because something's deviant doesn't mean it's criminal. Just because everybody does it doesn't mean that it's legal. I'm going to leave those discussion questions again for you to look at. I think they're helpful. I think they're things that you should think about. But the next part is to talk a little bit about the system. We have an interlocking network, a system of criminal justice. So the hopes is these things work together, but the big three components, and that's what we're going to be spending most of our time in this course, are on law enforcement agencies. The shorthand for that would be the police. The courts, which will be the judge, the prosecution, and the defense, and correction institutions, or what most people call prison. These three parts are designed to enforce criminal laws and to protect society from good behavior. But I want to step back and mention something I think is pretty important, because your book misses at least two steps here, but certainly one important step. And that important step is determining what will be a crime. Now that's a little bit of what we talked about before, deviance and non-deviance and where it comes from. But the determination of what is criminal is really the first part of the criminal justice system. If you say, well, it's not criminal to divorce your wife, it's not criminal to lie to someone if they ask, do I look thin in this dress? Then that's fine, but that's a step we make. If you decide something is criminal, if you say, okay, smoking a joint is going to be criminal, but smoking a cigarette is not criminal, that's really the first part. There's then this sort of second part, which is related to that and really just before law enforcement agents, and that is the detection of the crime. Is the crime detectable? So you have many people commit crimes, and I mentioned just previously speeding, but they're not detected. So that plays a role, I think. And I think both those things, the determination of what is criminal, the detection of the crime, are important parts of this puzzle of the criminal justice system. All right, so what is the purpose of the criminal justice system? And your book has these rather optimistic, I would say, points of view. One, it is to protect society from future crimes of the most dangerous offenders. I'm not sure that's true. That's something else I think you need when you read a source, a book, or when you listen to a professor like me. You need to ask yourself, is what they're saying true? Think of what can challenge it. challenge it with facts, not just opinions. Don't ever say, well, I don't want that to be true. The second part of it is to determine when an offense has been committed and provide punishment. The third part, according to your book, is to rehabilitate those who have been punished and return them to the community. And then the final part is to support the victims and to return them to their pre-crime status. I don't think those are the only parts of the system or the only purpose of the system. I think criminal law can be enacted to do all sorts of things. It can be enacted to reinforce public morality. It can be created to maintain political power. So I think that if we took something like prohibition, which was when alcohol was made illegal between 1929 and 1919,